Hello and welcome back to the In Your Mind podcast. I wrote in my journal every day about different experiences that are happening or different thoughts that I had. So I was traveling with my grandma and my sister and Molly, my sister's friend, and also my friend. So it was really nice to have like a trip that was more surrounded, I don't know, like it was very feminine because obviously there's all of us that are females and we're all in different kind of stages of our life, and it was nice to like connect with my sister in that way and my grandma as well. Kind of a cool insight into different parts of like the feminine. So my grandma and I first caught a flight. We went to Paris together first. So in Paris it was just me and her. We stayed in the Marie area, which is like the old Jewish area in Paris. As soon as we kind of got off the plane, it was interesting because you're initially kind of like slapped in the face with like a different culture and a different climate. And being in Australia here, it was really different to go from like cold, not that Australia really gets that cold, but cold to like a hot day. So what I wrote, getting from the airport to the Marie was a bit of a journey, although once emerged from the underground subway, I was smacked in the face by beauty and disbelief of a place existing that feels so different and distant that my only relation feels as though I am in a movie, and this city in many areas feels like a film set. So I remember this moment coming from the underground of like the train station and then being on an escalator and it like you were like breaching the surface, just seeing Parisian style like buildings, and there was also like a carousel like right in front of me, and it just didn't look real. Like it didn't look like anything I had ever laid my eyes on. Yeah, the only relation to it was like, oh, I'm in a film set. And it was also quite early in the morning and it was a weekend, so there wasn't many people around or anyone like going to work. So I think it was an interesting time to arrive. So I was kind of in a bit of a delirious state. And then we had a coffee opposite Palace des Vosges. I'm definitely butchering that, but it was a beautiful old garden. And apparently it's like the oldest designed garden in Paris. So that was pretty cool. I remember having a baguette there and a coffee and instantly just thinking like, wow, it's so normal just to like smoke, because everybody on the surrounding tables in this cafe was smoking. And also I was wondering like, does anyone speak English? I don't know, it just felt very foreign, I guess, which makes sense. Watching people sit very relaxedly having a cigarette and a coffee, and quite stylish and confident in their skin, it seemed, even from that moment. And then we wandered into the square and it was all happening. There was lots of little like kid play dates and people having like picnics, and there was an old sand pit, and that was really nice to see, just kind of like normal human things in another city, in another space of the world. Just be like, oh yeah, this is what happens on a Sunday, like this is what I'm used to. We then went to the Notre Dame and got a bit sidetracked by some secondhand markets, which was predominantly like people just selling their clothing, and I got a really nice shirt actually, which I was really happy about. So that was pretty cool. We then kind of had a look at the different like little boutique shops around the Marie area after looking at the Notre Dame. It was kind of a bit disappointing because the Notre Dame was still like getting rebuilt because of a fire. And I was really like fascinated by the fact that all of the shops seemed like very specialized and very carefully thought out. Like every product that was in there wasn't always a lot of products, but it was like every product was given its own space, which made everything feel more special. A lot of emphasis on design and fashion, which you could see even in that, like the space that they give each design and creation, like visually, you know, giving it space and having only one little object or one piece of item of clothing, not a bunch of things that are crammed in there, which is like harder to sort through. And I guess to me it just felt like it seems like it devalues the actual object, because when you have an object that's placed on its own, you can, like, I guess you're not forced, but you're more wanting to consider it and think about it and what you feel and make a judgment upon it as well. So I definitely felt myself really thinking about design and colours and that kind of thing as we wandered through the different shops. And then also what people were wearing seemed very, like, carefully crafted and considered. Like, it didn't feel random. And I think that made me feel like people are confident in themselves more, or care about themselves and put more effort into their look, which then makes me think that they put more self-care in, which, I don't know, it's an assumption, but was interesting to think about. We went into a little gallery that Marcos Alvarador, I'm probably also saying that name wrong, but his art is insane. It's like spiritual, philosophical, like simple. It feels like everything also is like very carefully considered and depicted very clearly. Like, it'll be like an image of like a body outline showing some sort of symbol that's very obvious and very like pronounced, like, you know, just a body with heaps of fire on it. I don't know, everything is very obvious in that sense, but then it's how it interplays on like a work of art, and it's a lot about like positioning and how positioning and symbols make you think of really deep concepts about like the reality of humanity and the world and all these things that are complex but seem really simple in the way that he kind of displays it. So I really liked being able to see his artwork in person, and I think honestly it just showed me that his online artwork really depicts really well what's actually in person as well, because it's so clear. So the next morning we woke up and I decided to go for a sunrise run along the canal, which was really cool because it was just a different pace, and it felt like, I think as well, just being solo, so not being with my grandma, I felt more out in the world in some way. Like, I just felt more of an explorer and more of like, I'm dictating my movements, which you are when you're running. So that was really cool, and just doing something that I do in Australia and in my like normal life, but in a different environment, was really good. Because with something like physical exercise, you're still very much like connecting to your body, and a lot of those feelings are very familiar, but then you've got the external environment like changing and being very, very stimulating. So in some ways it also made the physical exercise easier, because there was more attention placed on my changing environment and what was happening around me. In Sydney, I feel like so many people are up and at the sunrise, and there's so many things happening even at the early hours of the day, but it was kind of like a continual thing that I noticed, was that in Paris and in Italy, everyone, it felt like, awoken much more slowly and much later too. So that was interesting. The previous day when we were looking around Paris, we went to the tea shop, and I didn't realise how much tea can excite me. Like, just so many different combinations, and it all presented so beautifully again. Like, I think that's the thing about Paris, is like, all the way that I experienced it was very much things are given appreciation and aesthetically presented too, which entices you to consider it more and to give it more adornment in a way. So after that, Nana and I made our way to the airport, got on a flight to Rome, and we met Bella and Molly at the airport. It was really nice to greet my sister again and see her, because I was anticipating like my trip and she went 2 weeks before me. So it was really cool to see her already kind of settled into the traveling mentality, and to hear about her experiences like in person, and both of their experiences in person was really nice. And just the excitement of like familiarity too, just seeing their faces and running and hugging them was really nice. Yeah. So then we were in Rome. We had a really nice Airbnb there. It was really big, kind of like out of Rome too. It was maybe 15 minutes from the centre. One of the mornings there, we kind of just ran towards this big open space. We later realised that it was kind of the outskirts of Rome. That was really interesting because we were like running for, I don't know, like a kilometre, and then we saw sheep and like came across this farm, which at the time I was just really confused because, I don't know, a kilometre away was suburbia. So it was really nice and interesting to see like it both existing so close together, and that just you had no idea until you ran down a street that there was this big open space or the edge of like suburban Rome. So that was cool. There was like lots of creeks and grassy areas, and it seemed to really change in environment like so drastically. And the vegetation as well was very different. And there were so many dogs and lots of other people being very active in that park too. Throughout our whole time, the Euros, like the soccer, was on. And it was really interesting to see like the passion in Europe over the soccer, and it made you passionate about it too, because it's not something I would really watch here, but over there I became like more and more interested and more invested, because I realized like how excited, like seeing other people excited over something makes like you excited over it. So I really experienced that anyway. Yeah, that was funny. Yeah, one of the nights we were trying to like find dinner, and everywhere that we were walking past had like big screens watching the game, and it seemed like some restaurants hadn't opened because of the soccer was on and Italy was playing. So it was just like wild to see how much it impacts. Like passion really permeates daily life. There was a little bar right next to our Airbnb, and the owner was super friendly and super like excited by the fact that Nana was speaking Italian, and I don't know, he was just like an excitable, extroverted character. I don't know. It's just very, oh, come try this, have this. Like he was like, why are you drinking Aperol? Drink Campari. So he brought us like our Aperols, but really he then like came over like a couple of minutes after we'd had a couple sips, and he's like, huh, what do you reckon? And we're like, yeah, it's good. And he's like, haha, it's Campari, not Aperol. So he was just really funny, and he had a really nice friend that was coming over and kind of talking to us a little bit about like her life, and that like she comes to this bar like most nights, and she's a friend of his, and they have like a drink on the way home from work. And it was just nice to see that little like slice of people's lives. Made you feel like more connected to the space as well. We did some like more touristy things in Rome too. We went to the Roman Forum and the Colosseum. I really liked the Roman Forum, I think just because it was such a vast space and it was so huge. You don't feel, well, I didn't feel like overwhelmed or like it was crowded. Like there was so much room to just explore things in your own time, and it felt like you could be transported and imagine like a time of people gathering there, and it had really cool like intact ancient creations and art pieces. So that was and architecture. And then the Colosseum was also just really incredible because of how like structurally well kept it is. But I found it definitely more overwhelming just because it was so crowded. But really cool just to be in and see that and feel like you could very much imagine yourself watching like gladiators there, and how grand that would feel back in the day, because even how grand it feels stepping into it now. Like I think a lot of the more ancient things like the Duomos and the Colosseum and stuff, it made me think like we've got the technology now that we could build things like that with more ease than what we previously could, but I don't know if we necessarily would. Oh, the other part of Rome that I really loved was the Villa Borghese, and that was amazing just because it wasn't very crowded and everything felt very eye-opening, and like it made you just really consider deep things. And there was a lot of I found myself thinking of a lot of juxtapositions, or like, I don't know, different balances, different like yin and yang things, and like heaven and hell, and a lot of like religious philosophical questions that are depicted really well and intensely through art. Yeah, it was very clear and distinct. Mother Mary stepping on a snake with like a child, teaching it to kill sin. I thought that was really interesting artwork. Juxtaposing again, like you've got an innocent child and you're teaching it to like step on the head of a snake to like kill the sin, but it's done so like almost like gently, like it looks gentle, but then the snake's reaction isn't gentle. You're teaching a concept like that to like a little child that needs like to hold your hand in order to do that, and that was really cool. I loved that piece. And then also the entrance hall, we had this really cool discussion with my sister, discussing like what was kind of going on in the painting. It was a Merino Rossi, showing the battle of like light versus dark, and heaven kind of like prioritizing one side, or kind of giving its blessing to one side, and watching the angels and things prepare for like the arrival of like the dead soldiers. And yeah, it was just so layered and so many things to look at and take in, and such an interesting story, and also really cool to hear like how other people take in art, like hearing my sister talk about it and then what she noticed and what I noticed, and reflecting on like those differences and where we're like more inclined to see, and how we just look at different things, like we're all interpreting it slightly different. So after Rome we went to Naples. Naples was really cool. It was very different to Rome and Paris, and felt more carefree, lots of expressions of love. The men kind of greeted themselves with hugs and kisses, and it was way more like showing their affection in that way. We were unsure whether to visit Herculaneum or Pompeii, and we kind of like debated it a little bit, but we decided that we'd go to Herculaneum because it will be a little bit less busy and more hands-on in the fact that you can like walk into the sites and get more of a sense for things. There was archaeologists there still working on restoring things and uncovering things. I don't know, it felt very real in that sense. Also looking at like the bathhouses where the Romans would go to clean themselves kind of reminded me of like the Japanese onsens. And I thought a lot about like we've got some sort of inclination to wash in that way, in like a community way, which is in Japanese culture and then the old Roman culture, which I didn't really realise. And they're also both segregated by sex. You could still see like the old mosaics and tiled floors from that period. We also experienced like passeggiating in Naples. My nana described it as talking and gossiping and catching up, and very much like people watching and window shopping. So at night, after work is done, strolling up and down the main street, chatting with people and watching what everyone's doing and catching up. And it was really interesting to see in like how lively that culture is and how like prominent it is, and then like also for how late it goes on for. Like people are just walking up and down the street dressed up really nicely, window shopping a lot, maybe buying a few things, but really just majority of the action is just on the street. And we also saw that in Ischia a lot too. Ischia was the place we went to next, and it was very different from Naples, much more natural in the sense that it's an island and surrounded by water and cliffs, and a lot of the people, we caught like a ferry across from Naples to Ischia, and most of the people on the ferry were Italian people having a holiday, so not many tourists from other countries, which we liked. Our apartment was so beautiful. It was probably, it was my favourite apartment that we stayed in. We had a view of the ocean. The ocean was literally like 1 minute away, and the person whose house it was like came and greeted us, was kind of just telling us how much she prides herself on her house, and that her house is like my great love, she said, which I thought was really sweet, and you could really feel it. But yeah, it felt very relaxed to go from like the more chaos of cities with lots of people on top of each other and lots of like buildings and more unnatural things, to then be in a place that's a lot more open. A lot of the island being just still like quite wild. Lots of swimming, lots of jumping off little rocks and trying to find fish. There wasn't many fish actually. Quite deserted it seemed, which was a bit sad to see. Another nice memory I have from Ischia was we were walking towards the castle. We saw like these group of predominantly like men having a barbecue right on the rocks. They just like precariously set it up on these like unstable big rocks, and they were all just eating sausages and steaks and whatever else they could cook, and it felt very Australian and familiar in a lot of senses, which was nice to see. Yeah. Woo! That was good. Wow. Nice. We then got a ferry and a couple of trains to end up in Prato, and Prato was a bit of a shock to be like back amongst the suburban environment after like 3 nights on the island. But it was really nice because in Prato we stayed at one of my nana's friends' houses, and it was very homely in that sense. We also went up to around like where Vinci, which was much more of like the Tuscan hills and a lot of olive trees and vineyards, and was also very peaceful and wild and open. Nice to see like a different sort of lifestyle, and it was cool just to be like amongst another family, another like home environment somewhere else across the world. So that was really cool. We also experienced like their homemade olive oil, which was the best olive oil I've ever had, and it made me realize like how different it can be and how like simple a lot of their dishes and things are, but like the quality of ingredients is really highlighted because they only use a few ingredients, but the ingredients that they use, they like really specially source them. So I loved seeing that because I feel like I very much have like opportunity and the luxury of like amazing produce, but we cook with a lot of ingredients, and we don't necessarily let like one ingredient shine. So it was interesting to see that like simplicity, again, like given making something shine more makes it feel like more special, and you can really taste the richness and of just that one flavour. It was also cool because we went with my grandma's friend and he showed us Tuscan traditional dishes that we got to try. It was really nice to spend that time kind of incorporated into another person's family and another person's world, and how open they are to letting you tag along, which was awesome. So from Prato, we then went to Lucca. It was probably my favourite city. I really liked Paris as well, but Lucca, probably my favourite Italian city. Yeah, I would say. It was like Florence, but smaller and like easier to kind of like get around and to navigate, and just felt a little more natural in some senses. I guess it was just because there was more locals, really. Like you could kind of watch people's lives. When we arrived in Lucca, there was a festival going on, and like immediately we just saw heaps and heaps of teens like lined up on the street, like all having like little picnics, and we were like, what's going on? And apparently there was a festival happening, and they were all waiting to just get in, but they were there from like 10 and the festival didn't start till 8. So it was really interesting to like see like all these teenagers just coming and sitting and pretty much just spending the day there just to see like, and the show didn't start till 8, and then they went for like 2 hours. So I don't know, like that's predominantly their experience is just of that for that day, is just sitting on the street and having a picnic and being with their friends. And it was interesting to see like so many teenagers all in the one spot. We had some really good food. We went to a place called In Pasta, and it wasn't really traditional. I think it was vegetarian. Well, everything that we got was vegetarian, but the pastas changed every day. So they were always like very creative, and I had a truffle pasta, and I remember my sister had like a honey and pistachio ravioli pasta, which was really nice, but it was just so different and unique and like very, very fresh. Like the pasta was amazing. And we also had this like prosciutto. Yeah, it wasn't with tomato, it was with there's one with beetroot and then one with carrot and one with like mushed up like peas, which doesn't sound good, but it was really good. It was like very unique but also really yummy. There was also really nice like shops there, and the streets didn't feel too big or chaotic. It felt like a nice pace, and like a lot of people having like a very enjoyable lifestyle there. Like we had a run one of the mornings there, and there was a lot of people out running, and it's a walled city, so there was like a wall around the whole city what it sounds like, and it's lined with like big trees, so it's shaded from the sun because it got quite hot, but it was nice that you have the shade and like a place that you can go and be active. I also found a really beautiful jewellery shop there where the owner was making different jewellery pieces, and she was very friendly, and I got a ring which is onyx and silver. When I initially tried it on, I couldn't get it like past my knuckle because my finger had swollen, and she said come back when your fingers aren't swollen, and she like put it aside for me. But yeah, there was a lot more like you could see the artistic creation in that town, because there was things like that, like she was creating her jewelry at the like little desk in her shop, and then I saw like one woman using like a weaving kind of fabric machine making like scarves, and then I saw another man fixing like a little stool or like a little mini table thing in a window. I think just those things made it feel a lot more fun and creative and like an enjoyable place to live. Very interesting. And yeah, so Florence was lovely. We were only there, we did like a day trip and we went to the Uffizi and walked along the bridge, wandered around, found like a leather market, and the Uffizi was definitely like the standout thing for me, just seeing all those like magnificent works of art just in the one place in the building itself, and the paintings on its ceiling, and then all of the names. I liked how it was laid out too, with like a different artist for each room and with their name on it. It made you like consider the artists themselves as well as just like each individual work. Like you were more able to see like the distinctions between the artists because you could reflect on one and then leave the next room and then see the other. I liked that a lot.
And then this guy's going, I have an idea. And then one on the end is like, you have been bad.
So after Lucca and Florence, we went to Cinque Terra, which is the five lands, and we stayed in Rio Maggiore. And coming in by the train, like seeing like peaks of, like little sneak peeks of blue and cliffs, and it just got us like so excited. We all like looked at each other and like smiling, like, oh my gosh, like just coming back to like somewhere that's more wild. And like although like all the beautiful places that we saw that were crafted by like human hands, like that was incredible, but it's different also to see just like the wild natural beauty too. And I think in those places I definitely felt the most relaxed and the most like at peace. So it was just interesting to watch like how the environment impacts the nature and the kind of thoughts you're having and how you're feeling too. I felt like that was a cool part I could definitely sense throughout. In Rio Maggiore, we had a beautiful Airbnb host, and she kind of showed us her place and told us that we were in an apartment building that no other tourists came to, like it was a residential building, it was also nice to have that experience. I really liked staying in Airbnbs for that reason, because you could see how people truly live. And Rio Maggiore was a really nice size, like it was quite small little town, and a lot of like people that have come to hike or just like relax and sit by the beach and sit on the rocks, and easeful living for sure. But on the other side of that, it was also like how the locals farmed their veggies in the vineyards and stuff, and the lemon trees there. Everything's growing on such a slope that I can't imagine like harvesting like huge amount of quantities of grapes and things from like cliff sides. That also makes you think like it's such an extreme side of it. Like you have people that do that, and then you have like the holiday makers that are there to revel in it. We went on a really lovely walk to the next town, and the like normal coast walk was closed, so we had to go the hill way instead of just like around the coast and around the outsides. We had to go over the mountain, which was a bit challenging, but also really rewarding. And it wasn't that long really. It was only like an hour walk or something, but it was just very steep, and at times you're just in disbelief of how steep it is, but you just laugh, otherwise you'd cry. But coming down on the other side, going into the next town, I saw this guy with a guitar, and I was like, wow, you've got a guitar, you're carrying your guitar. And he's like, yeah, in like an Italian accent. And Bella's like, oh, do you know how to play any songs? And he's like, yeah, do you want me to play? And we're like, oh, I mean, sure, if you want to play. And he gets out his guitar and starts singing, and that was such a lovely experience, connecting with a stranger and music just happening out of nothing to something. that was really lovely and really special, and felt like peak experience, especially at the end of like a hard walk, having that experience and realizing like, oh, we're choosing to do this, like this is beautiful, this is gorgeous, like all of it is appreciated. And when we got there, there was really a really cool little, like wasn't so little, like a bit of a rock to jump off, so that was nice. Was definitely got the heart rate going a little bit on that one, and such clear blue water too. And then the next night we ended up staying another day because there was train strikes, so one of our trains wasn't going, so we ended up having to stay in Rio Maggiore another night. If I was to go back to any one of these places, I would definitely do the Cinque Terra and do like each town and the walks between them. It was just a great vibe, and actually a lot more fishies in the ocean there too. Would have thought they would have been more closer to like the south of Italy, but from what I experienced, it was more towards the north. So after Rio Maggiore, we went to Milan, and Milan was our last point altogether. We saw the Duomo, which was beautiful, but I also got a bit sick, and it was funny, as soon as I said a prayer, we lit a candle in there and I said a prayer, and I felt really sick, so I kind of was a bit more in my own little world that day, but still experienced some beautiful scenes. And I sat on the floor of, I can't remember what it's called right this moment, but like the big old shopping area, like that, I think it's like an arcade. Sat on the floor of that, which was really funny, I thought, because I was not feeling well at all, and there was all these just designer shops everywhere, and I'm like at the front on the floor of this mall, devaluing all the designer items, which I thought was funny. And then we had a really nice taxi driver, actually, when I was feeling sick. He pointed out these like funny socks. There was a man riding past on his little Vespa, and he was in a business suit, and I can't remember what the socks actually had on them, but they had some sort of like, I don't know, something silly, like, you know, like fun silly socks. And the taxi driver starts laughing and saying something in Italian that I didn't understand and pointing. And I eventually saw that he was pointing, like there were like these funny socks. I thought that was a funny thing. So yeah, that night we said goodbye to Bella and Molly, and yeah, it was kind of the end of our trip altogether. And they went on to do other things, and we went on to Paris for one more night. And really, finally, because I still wasn't feeling amazing and Nana wasn't feeling too good either, but we could stomach like Japanese and wanted some like rice, and we went to this really amazing Japanese curry place, which was so good. We got takeaway, and I also went to this cool pop-up store that had like different designers from all over the world, like a little collection of like small designers, and I got a really cool top for a friend that was like a sportswear kind of asymmetrical top that was really cool, and the people there in that shop was really nice. It was just cool seeing that kind of thing. And then we ate our dinner in a dog park, and it was really interesting because Nana remembered Paris having a lot more dogs, but there wasn't many dogs, and I noticed that a lot of the squares and a lot of the gardens, it said no dogs, but we went to this one that had lots of dogs, and it was quite a small park, like it's quite a small little square. In there, the dogs were just going wild. They were owning this square. It was like manicured, and I don't know, it just was really funny to see like dogs gone wild in this manicured created place, but their nature is just like rah. So we watched them all interact and people coming and going, and definitely like a group of like local people that come to the park frequently, and then other people that were kind of like getting to know each other, and how people really bond over their dogs, and you know how everyone just instinctively just watches as the dogs are going about their socialization and they're running. And then it was interesting, well, just after 8 a whistle blew, and this man who looked, it wasn't like a cop, but it was some sort of like officer or like someone, I don't know, with authority, came over to like just the front of the gate, blew his whistle, said like 3 words, and everybody just started exiting the park, and we started laughing and thinking like, you know, everyone's just been told off, or like this man blows this little whistle and everyone's up then out of there. It was a very interesting thing to witness and see how well behaved everyone was. Because I think all the squares and things, they seem to get like locked up. Yeah. And then that night another soccer game was on and we were quite tired, but next door you could hear, like we walked past and they were watching the soccer, and so we put the soccer on in the hotel we were staying in and opened up the windows and like heard everyone just reacting to the soccer game, which was really funny. When something unfair would happen, like you'd hear the whole street going, oh, or like, oh no, robbed, or like, I don't know, just noises, because I didn't understand the language, but it's funny, like that kind of stuff is universal. And then like hearing like the cheers and the excitement too, which I loved. Yeah. And then the last part of our journey was flying back. On the way home, we had a layover. It was like a 12-hour layover in Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, which was really cool actually, because we got given by the airline, given a hotel and lunch and like a tour of the city. So we had like a nice little sleep and some food, and were shown like some different important buildings. It was actually a really interesting moment of like reflection. We went to this, I think it was like I don't know if it was a parliament house, it was some sort of government building, but it was an old French building. In the front of it there was like this water fountain that was like a lotus, and I asked her about like the lotus because I was thinking there's a lotus on like Vietnam Airlines, and then just like a lot of lotuses around, and I thought, oh, like what's the symbol for lotus? And she said, oh, it's the symbol of like woman and fertility, and for like water, and for also for like good agriculture, which was interesting because I'd just been reading this book on that trip about aspects of the feminine and different symbols. That day read about like the vessel and how many connotations it has with like fertility and women throughout all of human culture. So it was really cool to like have a little piece of that in Vietnam, and a bit of like connecting some dots of like human symbols. And yeah, I think also just being in Ho Chi Minh after being in like a Western country was just so interesting. I don't know, like from the authoritarian like blow the whistle and everybody leaves, to like everybody like on motorbikes with like chickens and like boxes, and everyone's going every way, and doesn't seem like much order. Like it was just so funny to me to like go from like seemingly like one extreme to another in a few hours and just see like some stark differences so clearly that I just found it funny. But yeah, those were some of my experiences and some of the things that I thought I would share, and also just kind of record in this fun little way. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching. I also think that you don't have to go anywhere in order to have reflections. This is just another, I think like traveling for me is just the most interesting thing, is looking at how other cultures behave or like other lifestyles, and seeing what's normal somewhere isn't normal somewhere else, and it kind of like loosens barriers a little bit and realizes like so much of what we have are constructs and are really malleable, when it seems so like your habits and your rituals or mine seem very like falsely structured, like they become so stable and something you rely on so much, but really there's everything's so flexible and so malleable, and it's a nice way of like seeing that there's many ways to live. It's a nice reminder of that, but it's not the only way that you get that lesson. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye.